Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at Muammar Gaddafi's Green Book. This thing's a political manifesto.
It is.
But it's anything but ordinary, right?
Yeah.
Someone hears Green Book,
Yeah.
they might be thinking like eco-friendly,
Right.
saving the planet.
Sure.
But this is Gaddafi's blueprint for like a utopia.
Yeah.
It's this crazy mix of socialism and Islam and direct democracy all kind of woven together.
Yeah.
So we're here to break down like the core ideas.
Okay.
Everything from the criticisms of representative democracy to these kind of radical economic proposals.
Yeah.
And we'll see how Gaddafi tries to like bring all this stuff together into a single vision.
One of the things that makes the Green Book so interesting is that Gaddafi just straight up challenges basic Western political thought.
Yeah.
And he does it in a way that I think really reflects his own experience,
Yeah.
leading a post-colonial nation.
Right. From the jump, the Green Book goes right at parliaments, calling them a misrepresentation of the people. And then political parties are a contemporary form of dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty bold claims.
Strong words.
So what's the alternative? How are we supposed to govern ourselves if not through these systems
Yeah.
that have been in place for so long?
He imagines a system of direct democracy through what he calls these popular conferences and people's committees.
Okay.
So, imagine if you, the listener, were directly involved in making decisions at every level of government.
Wow.
No more relying on these elected officials to represent, your interests.
It's a very radical idea.
Yeah.
I can definitely see how it would appeal to people who are feeling disenfranchised
Yeah.
by like traditional politics. But how does this idea of direct democracy compare to other models that have been proposed throughout history?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's something that the Green Book doesn't explicitly address. Gaddafi seems to be proposing this system that's really uniquely tailored to his vision of a socialist Islamic society.
Yeah.
There are parallels, though, to other models of, democratic decision-making. For example, some elements of Gaddafi's vision kind of resonate with the principles of participatory democracy, which really emphasizes citizen involvement at the grassroots level.
Right.
There are also some similarities to deliberative democracy, which focuses on reasoned public discourse to reach consensus on the big issues.
It's interesting to think about how Gaddafi's ideas fit into this larger historical and philosophical landscape of democratic thought.
Totally.
But let's get into the specifics of his vision.
Okay.
How would these popular conferences and people's committees actually work?
So Gaddafi outlines this hierarchical system.
Okay.
Local committees would address, local issues, and then decisions would escalate to these higher level conferences for broader concerns.
Okay.
It's designed so that every citizen has a voice in the decisions that affect them.
It sounds like a very localized,
Right.
decentralized
Very much.
approach to governance.
Right.
But critics of direct democracy often point to potential challenges.
Sure.
Inefficiency or the difficulty of reaching consensus when you have a large, diverse population.
Yeah.
Does Gaddafi address these pitfalls?
He doesn't really get into the weeds of how to implement this thing.
Okay.
The Green Book focuses more on the theory behind his vision than the nitty-gritty details. And honestly, this is a recurring theme throughout the book.
Yeah.
He throws out these big ideas, these radical shifts from, conventional thinking. But he often leaves those implementation questions unanswered.
It's like he's presenting us with this thought experiment almost.
Yeah.
Challenging us to imagine this world where these ideas could take root.
Yeah.
And I mean, whether you agree with it or not, it definitely makes you think
Absolutely.
about the possibilities.
The Green Book is definitely a provocation.
Yeah.
It's a call to re-examine the systems that we just take for granted.
And it's that willingness to challenge the status quo that makes Gaddafi's ideas so compelling.
Yeah.
Even if they're ultimately impractical or even contradictory.
Totally.
So we've talked about his critique of representative democracy and the vision for direct rule by the people. But his ideas don't stop there.
Oh, no.
He's got this unique economic model as well that he calls natural socialism.
Yeah, and his economic ideas are just as revolutionary as his political ones.
Okay.
He wants to completely abolish the wage system.
Wow.
He argues that it creates this inherent power imbalance
Yeah.
between, the employers and the workers.
Okay.
Instead, he envisions everyone as a partner in the economy, sharing in the fruits of their labor.
So it's this fascinating concept, but I'm a little lost on how this would actually work.
Okay.
How do you get rid of wages? What are the mechanisms for distributing wealth and making sure that everyone's needs are met?
Well, he does give some specific examples.
Okay.
For instance, he argues that no one should own more than one home.
Okay.
So in his view, owning additional properties to rent them out, that's exploitation. This is a clear example of how he connects, these economic principles to individual liberty.
So for Gaddafi, economic justice is like intrinsically linked to personal freedom.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just like provide for people's basic needs.
Right.
He wants to create this system that empowers them to actually control their own livelihoods.
Exactly.
But again, I'm wondering about like the practicality.
Yeah.
How do you prevent the accumulation of wealth and make sure everyone contributes?
Right.
In a system where you don't have traditional incentives like wages and profits.
That's where this idea of natural socialism comes in.
Okay.
So Gaddafi argues that the three factors of production, raw materials, means of production, and producers, they should all get equal shares of the output.
So the workers, the people actually producing goods and services, they would directly benefit from their labor.
Right.
Without needing wages or having this accumulation of capital by just a select few. So instead of getting paid a wage, workers are basically partners in the enterprise, sharing in the profits or losses.
Yeah.
This is a big departure from like the capitalist model that we're used to.
Totally.
But how would this address some of the criticisms of socialist economies?
Okay.
People say that socialist systems can be inefficient.
Yeah.
They lack innovation.
Sure.
They struggle to compete in a global marketplace.
Right.
Does Gaddafi deal with any of these potential drawbacks?
He admits that shifting to this natural socialism would require a fundamental restructuring of societal norms and values. He thinks people would need to prioritize collective well-being over individual gain.
Okay.
And he argues that true economic freedom only comes when everyone has an equal stake in the system.
This is a very utopian vision for sure.
Definitely.
But just like his ideas about direct democracy, the question of practicality is still there.
Yeah.
Can you really reshape human nature that easily?
Right.
Can we make a system that's both economically just and efficient?
Yeah.
These are questions that I don't think Gaddafi fully answers.
Well, he leaves us with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Which maybe that's the point. The Green Book is less about providing concrete solutions and more about making us reimagine what's possible.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to think differently about how we organize our societies, to consider alternatives to the systems that we just kind of accept as they are.
It's definitely a fascinating and challenging read.
For sure.
And I think we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
So stick with us as we go deeper into the Green Book, and we'll explore Gaddafi's ideas about education, the role of women, and his controversial views on race and minorities.
Definitely a lot more to unpack, and I think you'll find it just as thought-provoking as we do.
For sure.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. As promised, let's jump into Gaddafi's thoughts on education.
Okay.
And, this is a topic that I think is really relevant today.
Yeah.
As we see, all this debate about the role of media and how it shapes public opinion.
Yeah. Gaddafi seems to have, predicted a lot of the concerns we have today.
Right.
About the influence of media on public opinion and the potential for manipulation and bias.
Totally. In the Green Book, he's really skeptical of privately owned media. He thinks that they're too influenced by, private interests, and that leads to propaganda and the suppression of dissenting voices.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
He thinks the whole pursuit of profit, undermines the ability of the press to actually serve the public good.
Exactly.
It's a critique that I think resonates with a lot of people today, especially as we see, these big media conglomerates.
Yeah.
And all this ownership concentrated in the hands of just a few corporations.
Right. So what's the alternative?
Yeah. What does Gaddafi propose instead of this privately owned media model?
So he calls for a democratic press.
Okay.
But it would be controlled by people's committees.
Interesting.
So basically, he's envisioning a system where the media outlets are owned and operated by the people, not by these private individuals or corporations.
It sounds like he's trying to find some kind of balance.
Yeah.
Between making sure the press is free, but also preventing it from being used for private gain or political manipulation.
Right.
But how do you reconcile this idea of a state-controlled press with the principles of free speech and open inquiry that are so important for a democracy? I mean, wouldn't committees appointed by the state basically act as an extension of the government, leading to censorship and the suppression of dissenting views?
That's a really valid concern, and it's one that Gaddafi doesn't really address in the Green Book. He seems to think that these people's committees would operate like totally independently and objectively, representing the interests of the people, not the state's agenda. But history shows us that state-controlled media, even when it's run by committees, it can easily be used for propaganda and to silence dissent.
It's a tough problem.
It is.
How do you create a media landscape that's both free and responsible? One that allows for different viewpoints, but also prevents the spread of misinformation and harmful content.
Yeah, and I think Gaddafi's vision for this democratic press, it's interesting, but it raises more questions than it answers.
For sure.
It highlights this tension between wanting a media that serves the public good, but also, the potential for state control to undermine the very freedoms that the press is supposed to protect.
And it's a tension that we're still dealing with today.
Absolutely.
With social media, the rise of fake news, the increasing polarization of public discourse.
It's clear that Gaddafi was worried about the power of the press and how it can shape public opinion. And while his solution of a state-controlled democratic press might seem kind of problematic, it reminds us that we always need to be safeguarding a free press.
For sure.
And making sure that it's a platform for, open dialogue and a range of viewpoints.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to another part of the Green Book that's caused a lot of controversy. Gaddafi's views on race and his predictions about the future of Black people.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the most challenging parts of the Green Book to really wrap your head around.
I agree.
Gaddafi makes some pretty bold claims about the inherent superiority of Black people, and he argues that they'll eventually, prevail in the world because of their resilience and their higher birth rates.
Yeah. These statements are obviously rooted in a racial worldview that doesn't really fit with modern ideas of equality and the rejection of racial hierarchies. So how do we understand these ideas in the context of his broader vision for a just and equitable society?
Well, it's important to remember that Gaddafi was writing from his own specific historical and cultural context. One that was shaped by colonialism and the fight for independence in Africa. So we need to understand his views on race within that context, even if we ultimately disagree with the basic assumptions behind them.
So we can acknowledge those historical factors, but we don't have to condone or excuse the things he said about race. It's a good reminder that even people who fight for radical social change can have views that clash with our values of equality and inclusivity.
Yeah, and it's important to engage with these difficult parts of the Green Book critically, to really break down the assumptions and think about the potential consequences of these kinds of views.
We can learn from the past, even the bad parts.
Exactly.
And use that to build a better future.
So we've covered a lot in this segment.
Yeah, we have.
From Gaddafi's controversial vision for a democratic press to his problematic views on race.
For sure.
It's clear that the Green Book is a complex and challenging book.
It is.
One that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths and grapple with ideas that we might find, abhorrent or even dangerous.
But it's by engaging with these ideas critically that we can really deepen our understanding of the world.
For sure.
The Green Book, for all its flaws and contradictions, can spark these really meaningful conversations about the challenges we face as a global society and the possibilities for creating a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. So as we go into the final part of our deep dive, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Green Book's lasting legacy. How has this book, with all its, complexities and contradictions, influenced political thought and social movements?
And what can we learn from Gaddafi's vision? Both the good and the bad, as we deal with the problems of our own time.
Those are great questions, and those are the questions that we're going to explore in our final segment, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
As
we wrap up this exploration of Muammar Gaddafi's Green Book, I'm kind of struck by the ambition of it all. These big ideas, but also a good amount of skepticism about, how practical it all is. And what the consequences would be if you actually tried to put this into practice.
For sure.
I mean, we've gone through his criticisms of representative democracy and dug into his radical economic proposals, and we talked about his complex and often contradictory views on everything from education to the role of women. So now I want to get your take on the Green Book's lasting impact. How has this book, with all its quirks and inconsistencies, influenced political thought and social movements?
It's hard to say for sure, you know?
Yeah.
It was everywhere when Gaddafi was in power.
Right.
Translated into a bunch of languages.
Yeah.
People were even saying it could be like a model for a new world order.
Wow.
But in terms of actual policies or political movements outside of Libya,
Yeah.
the impact has been pretty small.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the Green Book is so tied to a specific time and place.
Right.
It reflects Gaddafi's own worldview.
Yeah.
And the unique challenges that Libya faced as a post-colonial nation.
Exactly.
It's not really a blueprint that you can just pick up and apply anywhere else.
Oh, agree.
But even if it hasn't led to widespread changes politically or socially, has it sparked intellectual debate? Has it influenced discussions among academics about democracy, socialism, the role of the state?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's generated a ton of discussion and analysis, both positive and negative.
Okay.
Some scholars see it as a serious attempt to deal with the flaws of Western democracy and capitalism, offering alternative models for how to organize society.
Okay.
Others think it's more cynical, like Gaddafi trying to justify his authoritarian rule by dressing it up in this progressive language.
It's amazing how one text can lead to such different interpretations.
Right.
It shows how ambiguous the Green Book really is.
Totally.
And how hard it is to know what Gaddafi's real intentions were.
Yeah.
I mean, he was great at self-promotion.
He was.
He used his writing and his speeches to create this very carefully crafted image on the world stage. But beyond all the rhetoric and the personality cult,
You're right.
are there any genuinely valuable insights or ideas in the Green Book?
I think its most lasting contribution might be its willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to think outside the box when it comes to political and economic systems.
Interesting.
Gaddafi, whatever you think of him.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to question the basic ideas of the West and propose something radically different.
Even if we don't ultimately agree with his solutions.
Right.
Just the fact that he's questioning things, that he's pushing us to think differently about how we organize our societies.
Yeah.
That's valuable in itself.
For sure.
It forces us to look at our assumptions and consider that there might be other ways of doing things.
Absolutely.
Other ways to achieve justice and equality.
I think that's a key takeaway from our deep dive into the Green Book.
I agree.
It's not about accepting all of Gaddafi's ideas, but about being curious, being willing to challenge the status quo, and looking for new solutions to the complex problems that our world faces.
So as we wrap up this look at this kind of enigmatic and sometimes disturbing book, what would you say is the biggest lesson we can learn from Gaddafi's Green Book?
I think the most important thing is to stay vigilant and keep thinking critically. We can't take our political or economic systems for granted. We always need to be willing to question them and think about other possibilities.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And especially relevant today when we're facing so many challenges.
Right.
Climate change, political polarization, the rise of technology.
Totally.
We need to be bold in our thinking, creative in how we solve problems.
For sure.
And open to new ideas, even the ones that make us uncomfortable or challenge what we think we know.
Couldn't agree more. And I think the Green Book, despite all its flaws and contradictions, can remind us how important it is to be intellectually curious, to challenge what everyone thinks is true, and to never stop trying to build a more just and equitable world.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to end our deep dive into Muammar Gaddafi's Green Book.
Yeah.
It's been a journey full of surprises.
It has.
Contradictions.
For sure.
And a lot to think about. I hope you, our listener, found it as interesting and insightful as we have.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.
We'll catch you next time.